At the picnic, my sister smirked. She's not going anywhere. Maybe she can watch my kids for pocket money. My parents laughed. My daughter went quiet. Then my grandfather slowly set his fork down, looked straight at her, and said something that made the entire table freeze. My name is Laurel. And something happened at a family picnic that I genuinely did not see coming. Not the insult, I'd gotten used to those. What I didn't see coming was who stopped it. Let me back up. I'm 34. Single mom. My daughter Cora is 9, and she is, without question, the best thing I have ever done with my life. We live in a 2-bedroom apartment in Raleigh, North Carolina, and yes, it's small, and yes, money is tight, and yes, I am fully aware that I am not exactly where I thought I'd be at 34. Trust me, nobody reminds me of that more consistently than my own family. My sister Diane is 38. She married well, her words not mine, to a guy named Preston, who has the personality of a screensaver and the confidence of a man who has never once been told no. They have 3 kids, a house in a gated community, and a very strong opinion about everyone else's life choices. My parents, Roberta and Jean, have always orbited Diane. Not in a cruel, obvious way. More in that quiet, consistent way where you only notice the pattern after years of watching it. Diane got the bigger birthday parties. Diane got the college fund that actually covered tuition. Diane's divorce. Oh yes, she had one before Preston, don't let the pearls fool you, was a difficult season. Mine was a consequence of poor judgment. My ex-husband's name is Marcus, and that's all I'm going to say about him right now because this story isn't about him. This story is about one afternoon in June, a folding table covered in a plastic checkered cloth, and a sentence my sister said that I will probably hear in my head for the rest of my life. We were at my parents' house in Garner for the 4th of July weekend picnic. It was the kind of afternoon that starts out fine. Potato salad, sweet tea, my nephew Tyler doing something dangerous with a sparkler, and then slowly, almost imperceptibly, begins to go sideways. My grandfather, Papa Roy, was sitting at the head of the table. He's 81, quiet as a library, sharp as a tack, and he doesn't say much. When he does talk, people listen. Not because he demands it, just because the words he chooses tend to land. Cora was sitting beside him, helping him peel the label off his sweet tea bottle the way she always does when she's a little nervous. She gets nervous at big family gatherings. I've never pushed her on it because honestly, same kid. The conversation had drifted, the way it always does with my family, toward everyone's lives. My brother-in-law Preston was talking about some investment he'd made. My mom was asking Diane about remodeling their kitchen. And then my Aunt Gloria asked me what I was doing for work lately. I said I'd picked up a second freelance client and that things were moving in a good direction. Do you want to know what Diane said to that? She smiled. That particular smile she has, the one that doesn't quite reach her eyes. And she looked at Preston and then back at the table and said almost casually, like it was just a funny little observation. She's not going anywhere anyway. Maybe she can watch my kids for pocket money. And my parents laughed. Not a big laugh. Not a mean one. Just the laugh. Like it was a light little joke. Like it wasn't said in front of my 9-year-old daughter. I looked at Cora. She had gone completely still. Her hands were in her lap. She wasn't looking at anyone. She was doing that thing kids do when they're trying very hard not to feel something in public. And I felt something shift in my chest. Something that had been bending for years finally, quietly, snapped. But I didn't say anything yet. Because Papa Roy, without looking up from his plate, slowly set his fork down. And the sound of that fork, just that small deliberate sound, made the entire table go quiet. He lifted his eyes. And he looked directly at Diane. What he said next, I'll get to that. But first I want you to know, I had never, in 34 years, heard my grandfather raise his voice at a family event. Not once. He didn't raise it this time either. He didn't have to. Stay with me because what he said cracked something open in this family that had been sealed shut for a very long time. And what happened in the weeks after that picnic? I genuinely couldn't have scripted it. Papa Roy looked at Diane for what felt like a full 10 seconds. Nobody moved. Preston had put his cup down. My mom had stopped mid-sentence. Even Tyler, who had been doing laps around the yard with a paper plate, had somehow sensed the shift and gone still near the fence. And then Papa Roy said, in that low, even voice of his, "Diane, that child is sitting right there." That was it. 6 words. He didn't yell. He didn't lecture. He just said it the way you'd state a fact about the weather. Plain, calm, and completely immovable. Then he picked his fork back up and went back to his plate like he hadn't just flipped the atmosphere of the entire backyard upside down. Diane's face went through about 4 expressions in 2 seconds. Surprise. Embarrassment. Then that particular brand of indignation that people reach for when they've been caught doing something they know was wrong but aren't ready to admit it. She opened her mouth, closed it, then said, "Dad, I was just joking." Papa Roy didn't look up. That single syllable somehow carried more weight than a paragraph would have. My mother, Roberta, jumped in immediately the way she always does when things get uncomfortable, smoothing, redirecting, offering someone more potato salad. She looked at me with this expression that was half apology and half plea, like please don't make this a thing. And honestly, that look might have hurt more than what Diane said. 'Cause I knew that look. I had been receiving that look my entire life. It meant, we see what happened, but we'd really prefer you absorb it quietly so the afternoon can continue. Do you think I stayed quiet? I want to be honest with you. My first instinct was, in fact, to stay quiet. Not because I was fine, but because I have spent so many years being the one who keeps the peace that it's practically a reflex at this point. I'm the one who lets things go. I'm the one who calls first after an argument. I'm the one who shows up anyway, even when showing up costs me something. But then I looked at Cora again. She had shifted in her seat and was now leaning very slightly into Papa Roy's arm. He hadn't made a big deal of it. He just sort of adjusted naturally the way old people do when a child moves close to them. Like it was the most normal thing in the world. And something about that image, my daughter quietly pressing herself against the one person at that table who had spoken up, made my throat tighten in a way I hadn't expected. So instead of staying quiet, I did something I had genuinely never done before at a family gathering. I addressed it directly. I looked at Diane and I said very calmly, "She does hear everything, by the way. She always has." Diane rolled her eyes, actually rolled them, and said, "Laurel, you're so sensitive. It was a joke between adults." "She's 9, I said. "Not deaf." Preston chose this moment to clear his throat and say something about the weather forecast for the following week, which, bless his heart, helped absolutely no one. My dad, Gene, who had been very focused on his corn on the cob throughout all of this, finally looked up and said, "Let's just enjoy the afternoon, girls." Girls. We are 34 and 38 years old respectively, but sure, Dad. Girls. I didn't push further right then. Not because I had nothing left to say. Believe me, I had a list, but because Cora was watching me, and I didn't want her to see me unravel at a picnic table. She'd already seen enough for one afternoon. We left about an hour later. Earlier than planned. On the drive home, Cora was quiet for a long time. She had her forehead against the window and was watching the highway go by. Then, without looking at me, she said, "Mom, does Aunt Diane think we're poor?" And I had to take a breath before I answered that. "I think Aunt Diane sometimes says things without thinking about who's listening," I said. Cora considered this. Then, Papa Roy thought about it. "Yeah," I said. "He did." She nodded slowly, like she was filing that away somewhere. Then she turned the radio on and didn't bring it up again. But I brought it up. Inside my own head, approximately 900 times over the next 2 days. Because what Cora said was sitting in me like a splinter. Papa Roy thought about it. And the more I turned it over, the more I realized something I hadn't let myself fully acknowledge before. My grandfather had always seen what was happening. He'd just chosen, for decades, to let things work themselves out. And something about that picnic, something about watching Cora go still, had made him decide that enough was enough. I called him 2 days later, just to check in the way I always do on Sundays. And at the end of the call, before we hung up, he said something that I've been thinking about ever since. He said, "Laurel, you don't owe anyone a smaller life just to make them comfortable." I didn't know what to do with that yet, but I was about to find out. 'Cause about a week after that picnic, Diane called me. And the reason she called, I genuinely did not expect it. Not even a little. Diane called on a Tuesday evening. Already unusual. Diane doesn't call me unless she needs something, wants to compare something, or needs to process a conversation with our mother using me as a sounding board. I almost didn't pick up. I was helping Cora with a science project, a papier-mâché volcano that had completely taken over our kitchen counter, when my phone buzzed. I saw Diane's name and just stared at it. Cora looked up. "Is that Grandma?" "No, Aunt Diane." She raised her eyebrows in a way that was frankly too knowing for a 9-year-old and went back to her volcano. I stepped into the hallway and answered. Diane's voice was different. Not softer exactly, but quieter. Like she was sitting with something uncomfortable and hadn't figured out how to set it down. Papa Roy called me, she said. Now, Papa Roy doesn't make phone calls to stir things up. This is a man who worked 40 years as an electrician, raised 4 kids, and has zero interest in family politics. When he dials your number specifically, it means he has something to say and has decided the time has come. Diane said he talked to her for almost 30 minutes. She didn't share everything, and I didn't ask, but she told me enough. He talked about my grandmother Bet. About how hard she'd worked her whole life, how their own family had made her feel small for it, and how he'd let it happen more than he should have. How he'd carried that regret for 20 years. Then he told Diane directly, "Don't carry that same thing. It's heavy." I stood in my hallway and didn't say anything for a moment. Then Diane said quietly, "I didn't mean for Cora to hear that." My first reaction was not gracious. It was somewhere in the neighborhood of, well, maybe think before you speak. Valid. But I kept that inside and said, "But she did hear it, Diane." "I know. Can I talk to her?" That stopped me completely. Because in 9 years of Cora's life, Diane had never once asked to specifically speak to her. Not on her birthday. Not after school plays. Cora was always just scenery in Diane's version of family events. Do you think I handed Cora the phone right then? I didn't. I told Diane I'd think about it and got off the call. Then I stood in that hallway for a solid 3 minutes just breathing. I called Papa Roy the next morning. "She told me you talked to her," I said. What exactly did you say?" "Nothing she didn't already know. Sometimes people just need to hear the things they already know out loud." I laughed despite myself. "You could have warned me." "Wouldn't have been the same," he said. 3 days later, my mother Roberta showed up at my apartment unannounced. She was holding a container of her chicken and dumplings, her love language, and wearing the expression of a woman who rehearsed something in the car and is now second-guessing the whole speech. She came in, sat at my kitchen table, folded her hands. "I shouldn't have laughed," she said. "No," I said. "You shouldn't have. I know Diane goes too far sometimes. I just don't always know how to." She stopped. Started again. "Your father and I love you both the same, Laurel." And this is where I didn't handle things perfectly. What I said next was true, but it came out sharper than I meant it. Mom, loving us the same and treating us the same are 2 completely different things. And I think you know that. She didn't argue. Didn't defend herself. Just sat there looking at the table. And I realized she'd spent 40 years keeping the peace the same way I had. Absorbing, redirecting, smoothing, and maybe didn't know another way. That didn't make it okay. But it made it something I could hold without being purely angry. We ate the chicken and dumplings together. Didn't solve everything. But something opened up just enough to let a little air in. And then I made a decision. One that surprised even me. I'd been thinking about it since Papa Roy said I didn't owe anyone a smaller life. I decided to stop making it smaller. The first step I took. Diane absolutely did not see it coming. The freelance client I'd mentioned at the picnic, the one Diane had so generously suggested I trade for babysitting pocket money, was a small marketing agency downtown called Bright Line Creative. I'd been doing content work for them for about 4 months. Nothing glamorous. Copy, social posts, the occasional campaign brief. But 2 weeks after that picnic, their creative director, a woman named Simone, called me into a meeting. She slid a folder across the table and said, "We want to bring you on full-time. Salaried. Benefits. The whole thing." I looked at the number on the paper. Then I looked at it again. It was more than I'd made at any job in my entire adult life. I drove home that afternoon with the windows down even though it wasn't particularly warm, because I needed the air. I called Papa Roy from the parking lot before I even went upstairs. "Something good happened today," I said. "Tell me," he said. So I did. And when I finished, he was quiet for a second and then he said, "Well, you earned it. Not I told you so. Not see things work out. Just you earned it." I held on to that for the rest of the day. Now here's the part where I'll admit I did something a little petty. Not proud of it. But not entirely ashamed either. You can decide what you think. I didn't tell my parents right away. Or Diane. I sat on that information for 10 days. 10 whole days. While my mother called to check in and my dad texted about some home improvement show he was watching, and Diane sent a group family text about Thanksgiving plans as if the picnic had simply evaporated from history. I just didn't mention it. Was that mature? Probably not entirely. But after years of sharing good news in that family and watching it get minimized, qualified, or quietly redirected towards something Diane was doing, I wanted to hold this one close for a little while. Just for me. Just until it felt solid enough that no one else's reaction could shake it. Does that make sense to you? Think it might. On day 11 I told Cora. We were eating cereal for dinner because it had been a long week and neither of us had the energy for anything more complicated. I said, "Hey, Mom got a real job." She looked up. Like a good one. Like a really good one. She put her spoon down and looked at me very seriously. "Are we going to move?" "Maybe eventually," I said. "Somewhere nicer." "But not yet." She nodded slowly, then picked her spoon back up, then put it back down again. "Mom." "Yeah. Can we get a dog?" I laughed so hard I nearly knocked my cereal over. Leave it to Cora to take a genuinely life-changing moment and immediately redirect it toward the dog conversation we've been having for 2 years. "We'll see," I said. "That means yes," she said. Did not mean yes. But I was smiling for the rest of the evening. I finally told my parents on a Sunday call. Casual, straightforward, just dropped it into the conversation like it was any other update. "New job, full-time, starts in 3 weeks. My dad said, "Well, that's great, Laurel, really great." And I could hear that he meant it. My mother got a little quiet and then said, "Full-time? With benefits?" "Full-time. With benefits." Another pause. And then, "I'm proud of you, honey." And she said it in a way that made me think she'd been waiting for a reason to say it, and hadn't realized it until just then. Diane found out through our mother, which I'll be honest, I had anticipated. And I knew Diane well enough to know that information would sit with her in a particular way. Sure enough, she texted me that same evening. "Mom told me about the job. That's great news." Short, careful. The punctuation of someone choosing their words with more attention than usual. I wrote back, "Thanks, Diane," and left it there. Because here's what I've learned about people like Diane. Not bad people, not villains, just people who have operated from a position of quiet superiority for so long that they genuinely don't notice they're doing it. The thing that reaches them isn't a confrontation. It isn't an argument. It's watching you not need their approval anymore. That's the part that lands. 2 days later she called again. And this time the conversation was different. Longer. Less careful. She asked about the job, actually asked with actual questions. She asked about Cora. She mentioned, almost offhandedly, that her youngest, a 6-year-old named Bree, had asked why Cora never came over to play. "Kids notice things," I said. "Yeah," Diane said. "They really do." There was something in her voice when she said it. Something that sounded, if I'm being generous, like the beginning of understanding. I didn't make a big deal of it. I didn't need to. But I filed it away. What happened next brought the whole family to the same place at the same time again. And this time the dynamic was nothing like that picnic. Papa Roy said something again. But this time it wasn't to correct anyone. It was something else entirely. And honestly, got me. Papa Roy turned 82 in September. My Aunt Gloria organized a small dinner at my parents' house. Nothing elaborate, just family, a few of his old neighborhood friends, a chocolate cake from the bakery he'd loved since 1987. The kind of evening he actually liked. No fuss. Just people he loved in the same room. I almost didn't go. Cora settled that. When I mentioned skipping, she looked at me like I'd said something genuinely unreasonable and said, "Mom, it's Papa Roy's birthday." So we went. I walked in braced for something. Old habits. I had my guard up in that low, quiet way you carry it when family warmth has turned sideways on you before. But the evening was different. Diane was already there when we arrived. She walked over when she saw us. Not to say something pointed, just to say hi. She crouched down to Cora's level and said, "Hey, I like your jacket." Cora gave her that careful measuring look kids give adults they're not entirely sure about. Then said, "Thanks. Mom got it at the thrift store." I braced slightly. Diane just said, "Good find." No commentary. No edge. Just a normal human response. I didn't make a big deal of it. But I noticed. Papa Roy was by the window when I found him, talking to his old friend Walter. He looked up when he saw me and his whole face shifted, like someone turned a light on behind his eyes. Cora ran straight to him. He caught her hand and said, "There she is." We sat together for a while. Walter drifted toward the food, and it was just the three of us. Papa Roy asked Cora about school. She told him about a book she was reading, a girl who finds a hidden door in her house that leads somewhere else. He listened to the whole thing with complete seriousness, like it was the most interesting thing he'd heard all week. Then he looked at me. "How's the new job?" "Really good. Better than I expected." He nodded. "You sound different." "Different how?" He thought about it. "Less apologetic," he said. After the cake, Papa Roy asked for the room's attention, which for him meant simply waiting until it got quiet, which it always did. He didn't stand. Just looked around at everyone and said, "I've been thinking about what I want to leave behind. Not things. What I want people to carry." The room was completely still. "Be kind to each other," he said. "Not just polite. Kind. Polite is easy. Kindness costs something. And it's worth it." Then he looked at Cora. "You remember that, sweetheart." "I will, Papa Roy," she said. Completely solemn. Something moved through my chest that I didn't have words for. The closest I can get is relief. Not the relief of a problem solved. The relief of something finally, clearly named. I looked across the room at Diane. Her eyes were wet. She caught me looking and didn't glance away, just gave me a small nod. The kind that needs no translation. I nodded back. Things didn't transform overnight. I want to be honest about that. Diane and I aren't suddenly best friends. My mother still smooths things over when she should let them breathe. My dad still occasionally calls us girls. But something genuinely shifted. Diane started texting more. Normal things. Something funny one of her kids said, a recipe question. Once a long message late at night about something she was worried about that had nothing to do with me but that she sent to me anyway. I started answering. Cora and Diane's youngest, Bree, had a playdate in October. Awkward at first, kids circling each other cautiously. By the end they were building something out of couch cushions and refusing to let any adult near it. Universal sign that children have decided to be friends. And the job kept being good. Turns out Papa Roy was right. I had earned it. And the more I showed up believing that, the more everything else seemed to arrange itself around it. I think about that picnic sometimes. About Cora going still. About Papa Roy setting his fork down. About 6 quiet words that somehow said everything. That child is sitting right there. He didn't fight my battle. He just reminded everyone there was a child at that table watching how adults treated each other. And that was enough. That was, it turns out, exactly enough. If you've ever been the person who absorbs things quietly, who lets things go because it's easier, sometimes the shift comes from the most unexpected place. Sometimes it's an 82-year-old man and 6 words and a lifetime of quiet wisdom deciding that today is the day. If this story reached you in any way, I'd genuinely love to hear about it in the comments. I read every single one. And if Papa Roy and Cora earned a like from you, that means the world. If something didn't sit right, tell me that too. Thank you for being here and for listening. It really does mean everything.